This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz. Very excited to be speaking with John Magaro about September 5. How are you, John?
Thanks for having me, Abe. I'm well. I'm well. Yeah, excited for a holiday. And in the midst of packing, we're going on vacation and have Home Alone on in the background, which is a holiday, essential film. So just feeling the holiday energy.
That's great. Well, I was going back. We actually had the chance to speak a few months ago now for Leroy, Texas, and I asked what you had coming up. And you said, I can't really talk about a lot, but I do have this film I'm really passionate about called September 5. And so it's nice to be able to revisit that in more detail now.
Yeah, yeah, I had a good
So,
feeling about it.
well, I understand you were an extra in Munich, like right at the beginning of your film career, right?
I mean, if you could call it a film career, I had just moved to New York and I just needed any job that I could get. I was telemarketing and just looking for any in. It wasn't really about film, it was just about working. And, always thought I was going to be more of a theater actor. And back then you would get a bunch of headshots printed out and staple your resume onto it. And then you would send it around and you send it to everyone. And then I got a call saying, "Do you want to come over to Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and work for 2 days as a background actor?" And I said, "Yeah," and it happened to be Munich, so it was a long time ago, and I learned nothing about film. I just stood around, but it was cool. It was a cool experience.
Well, obviously, what happens in this film is a very, very small part of what happens in Munich, even though it's the catalyst for everything. What
Mm.
did you know about this whole, event in history?
I mean, I knew a good amount of what had happened on that day. Uh, I don't remember exactly when I learned about it. I mean, my mother's Jewish, so I was raised around this sort of being something that was discussed. I remember the image of the Black September member on the balcony. Um, we saw one day in September. Saw Munich, obviously. But I didn't know about the sports angle of it. I didn't know a sports broadcast team covered it, and I didn't know that it was the first time a thing like this was shown, globally throughout the entire world live. So that was all new information to me.
What kind of research did you do once you got the role?
Luckily Jeff Mason, who is the person that I play in the film, that was my character in the film, he's still with us. He's very active and he's got a great memory, especially for that day. He's very revered in the sports broadcast world. He went on from that day. He was 32 at the time, and it was the beginning of his career. And he went on from that to be an executive at NBC Sports and just he's in the Sports Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Very legendary career. So I got in touch with him right away, and we started talking, and he gave me a picture of what was going on that day, and mainly he presented it very lucidly and very rationally. It was they were doing their job. There wasn't any time for emotion. They were focused. And it wasn't until they got home after 22 hours of this marathon broadcast that him and his colleague Don Allmeyer poured themselves a big drink at 3 a.m. the next day and let the sorrow out, cried on each other's shoulders, let the anger out, frustration, all those feelings that they had bottled up within them. And then beyond that, he facilitated getting me into a sports broadcast control room. So I spent about 2 months shadowing at CBS Sunday Football, going to ESPN basketball trailers behind, Madison Square Garden, where they put the show together live, and really learning that language. And I've been comparing it to learning an instrument. It's very similar. Like you have to learn an entirely new language. Um, I learned drums for a role before. It was very similar to that. Tim, our director, has been comparing it to conducting an orchestra, and if you go in those rooms, it's very, very much that you're running this entire thing. There's a lot of adrenaline, but it takes a tremendous amount of focus and awareness and knowledge to be able to call a live broadcast. So I really wanted to get that right, and Jeff, as well as Sean McManus, who's Jim McKay's son, who's the former head of CBS Sports as well as CBS News. uh, were very helpful in making that happen for me.
I was curious about this, filming with all the cameras and then looking at cameras because I feel like, you said you've done theater and then there's a lot of TV and film, but this has to be a different experience just acting with all the cameras right there, and that's part of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, they stayed out of the way. They stayed out of the way. As far as our cinematography crew, you know,
No, I mean actually watching, like when you're in the control room watching the screens and everything, that the screens are part of the frame for you.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it was, but it felt almost like just another actor that you were playing off of. You know, having the real footage of Jim McKay there was enormously helpful, and it made it so much easier for us. And there was never any green screens or anything like that. We were playing off the real footage, and I think because I had done all that research, it actually became almost second nature. So the although the Jim McKay stuff was we really didn't change because it is what was the footage. It still felt in a way like playing off of another actor, and it was kind of a fun experiment that I don't know if I'd ever get the chance to do again.
There's also obviously a lot of very somber parts of this film, but then some humor to be found in it, which is interesting. How did you balance that tone on set?
Well, I mean, the humor I think is something that the real Jeff Mason has. He's got a great sense of humor. You talk to people who know him, who worked with him. He's a charmer in a way, and I wanted to infuse that quality into it. Um, we really didn't have many opportunities because once the gunshots go off and it gets serious, it becomes that's the primary focus. But it became important, at least in that first 20 minutes, to show the lighter side of Jeff, and that these people have a relationship, that they're colleagues, that they like each other. They had been working to build this production facility for months, and there was an excitement and almost like a party atmosphere up until the hostage situation occurred. So that was really important for us to capture. I mean, there's also something about when you're working on something that's so heavy, that when the camera isn't rolling, that you naturally sort of start to goof around and joke around. Ben Chaplin and I would do that on set. It was just a way to lighten the tone, so it doesn't become too morose or too somber. I think if you, I don't think we ever wanted to play into that. We wanted it to feel authentic, and although it was heavy material, we still wanted to keep the ball in the air in a sense that it wasn't too oppressively heavy in the tone of it because the material was heavy enough.
I know the film has screened at a few festivals. When was your first opportunity to see it with an audience on a big screen?
I haven't seen it with an audience on the big screen.
Wow.
I don't really.
Okay.
I tend not to watch my movies with audiences. I saw it in a screening room at Paramount with a few people, and that's kind of it. It's tough for me to sit in a crowd because I have my own expectations, and I've discovered that sitting with an audience is a kind of an unhealthy experience for me. I'm not watching the movie for the reasons you're supposed to be watching it, and it becomes a little too self-focused, and I don't think you can enjoy a movie or you can watch a movie if you're thinking about yourself. You need to be able to let that go and go on the journey of the film. So I find it more helpful to watch it, alone, or maybe with my wife or something like that, just a small group.
Well, I had the chance to see it at AFI Fest, and it was very powerful, packed auditorium. I know Peter was there, and so I'd heard a lot about it because it's always interesting when you have a film that comes out towards the end of the year but has been on the festival circuit because you hear these things and you're never really sure, and especially if you've seen the documentary, which I'm not sure a lot of people have. I was surprised to hear that you
Mhm.
said you had seen it earlier because I feel like it's from 2000, people don't necessarily know about it, but I was very pleased to see this, and I think it was very powerful.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, it's a difficult event, and obviously it's difficult with things that are going on right now. But I think it's just important for people to see it because it takes us back to the root of when media changed. Nowadays I think we've become it's over saturated, and we kind of take for granted how we're given these kinds of events. and I think maybe desensitized to it. So there's something novel about seeing the first time it was shared with a global audience, and this is that event.
I think also in terms of the conflict that's at the root of it, I've, read some people who I don't think have seen the film dismissing it as portraying one
I
perspective or
know
something like that. And I feel
it's
like it
not.
does such an important job. And from what I understand from Tim, it's actual conversations that happen in saying, is this person a terrorist? What is the legal
What's
definition?
the
Can we
term? What do
call
we
them
say?
that?
I mean, that was it. It's not, and I'm glad you brought that up because I've seen those comments online, and I see people who haven't even seen the movie who are going in with these preconceived notions of it. I wouldn't have signed on to a movie that was Israeli propaganda. I wouldn't have signed on to a movie that was Palestinian propaganda. I signed on to a movie that is objective and, if anything, a criticism of the media. And I think that's something, whatever side you're on, we could have a discussion and find agreements about. Um, I think it's very sad that that has entered into the conversation. I understand why, because of the hypersensitive nature of the conflict right now, which sadly should always kind of be hypersensitive, and it sort of fades into the background until some tragic event happens to push it to the forefront again. But it's been going on for decades, if not millennia, and unless I think for us to find some sort of common ground and solution, maybe discussing how our consumption of media and journalism around that event might make us find some sort of similarities and maybe achieve some sort of common ground for a change in things. But yeah, I hope people go into it and look at it as what it is, as as a comment on journalism, and not some sort of piece that's choosing a side or not choosing a side in this incredibly complex conflict.
I know there was also an intention to not, show any footage of people who actually were killed. And I think if you come away from this film and think anything of, oh, there's a reason that these athletes should have been killed, I think that's right. You can do your own research about, the conflict underlying it, but
Yeah.
ultimately just as much as about journalism, about the fact that these are innocent people who were targeted and killed, and that should
I
never
mean,
have happened.
there's also something interesting seeing this broad, the sports team who really didn't have much geopolitical knowledge of the conflict. The most knowledge comes from Peter Jennings, who is a Mideast correspondent at that time. But it shows that these people who changed the tone forever and brought in words that are now used commonly, they were just, they were doing the best they could. They didn't know. They didn't know the nuances and complexities of what had been going on, and I think that's the portrayal. So like people might see it and be like, well, they're dismissing an entire side. Unfortunately, on that day, that kind of happened because they didn't know the sensitivities. They didn't know the nuances of what was going on that day. And I think, again, that's a discussion that we hope people have after they leave the movie. But it wasn't Tim trying to whitewash over anything. It was just we were trying to portray it as authentically as it was, and that's the way it was.
Well, I know it's been a busy year for you, but I think because of COVID and strikes and schedules, I don't think any of these films that you have out now actually were shot recently. But Day of the Fight is another film that you were in recently that I had a chance to speak a lot of your co-stars, and everyone is so passionate about that film. I've seen people be excited about the work they're doing, but the people involved in that film are so like enthusiastic. What was that experience like for you?
Well, Jack is an old friend. We did a film called Not Fade Away many years ago. We've been, friends since then, him, Will Brill, and myself. He called me up. I would do anything for Jack. I was excited to get that call. I'm a fan of Michael Pitts. We've become friends since then. Um, it was just Jack's passion on that set and his passion for that project, which he told me about years before it was actually shot, was just something that was infectious, and was happy to be a little part of it. And there's something about making movies with people who actually care and love film, and that was one of them. Yeah.
I mentioned Leroy, Texas at the beginning of our conversation, and I was a little surprised to see it show up on, I think, the Satellite Awards, some
I know.
nominations at the end of the
I
year.
know.
Not that it didn't deserve, just I didn't realize some movies you think people just haven't seen as much as they have. How did you
Well,
respond
that's
to
the
that?
four. I think that film has resonated more with foreign journalists, but Maybe that was my booby prize because I didn't get any other nominations for September 5. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Satellite Awards. I never thought I would get a nomination for Best Comedic Actor, but I'll take it, and I appreciate it.
And I was at the Tribeca Festival this year and I saw this film with a very long title, The Shallow
Oh
Tale of a
yeah,
Writer
yeah,
Who
yeah.
Decided to Write About a Serial Killer. What's happening with that film? I haven't heard anything
I think
since.
it just sold. I
Okay.
don't have all the details, unfortunately. I'm
Okay.
not really sure. I can't even remember who it sold to. I just got a text from Ren Arthur, Steve Buscemi's producing partner. So hopefully that will be out and more people can see it. I think in the new year.
I'm sure we could spend half an hour on this alone, but what is it like working with Steve?
I've known Steve for a long time. David Chase, who's like my mentor, father figure, introduced me to Steve many years ago. I was glad when we finally got a chance to work together. And he's just as wonderful as everyone thinks he is. Everyone in the business loves him. He's just a good guy, and he's fun to work with. I can't wait till the next time.
Well, I know you don't like watching yourself, but I imagine you've seen some other stuff. Is there any film or performance you've seen recently that's really sticking with you as particularly memorable and good?
Yeah, Carla and Amelia Perez. I thought she was absolutely phenomenal in that. I mean, basically playing two characters, uh, but same at heart and like going all over the map, but never leading into histrionics, just honest and real, never like throwing shit at a wall like some actors do to try and get their awards. I mean, she just was grounded and honest throughout. And in a musical, where you can really go for craziness, she just kept it authentic and honest, and I really thought that was a revelation.
Great choice. Well, I thank you so much, John, for a very thoughtful conversation. And with your wealth of projects, I'm sure we'll have the chance to talk again soon.
Yeah, very soon probably. Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. Happy holidays.
You too.